How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.
Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, July the 29th. If it had been term time, today would be Prime Minister's Questions. Andy Burnham in a clash with leaders of the opposition in that Commons bear pit. But the new PM has said he wants to do things differently. So instead, today, he invited Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey, though not Nigel Farage or Zack, Polanski, to a meeting to talk about social care. Did anyone turn up, and will it fix anything? My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Yeah, we're going to talk about that cross-party talks element of this today, because let's be absolutely clear, there hasn't been a shift in policy here. There's been a shift in vibe and emphasis, but no shift in policy. Andy Burnham is doing exactly what Keir Starmer did. He is going to wait for a review into the social care sector by Louise Casey, the 25th such commission or review into the sector that we've had in the last few decades. And that's it, right? At time of speaking, nothing concrete more than that. Nor will there actually be a cross-party number 10 door picture moment. That might have been the hope. But of course, the leaders of the main opposition parties aren't going to gift him that. For one, Ed Davey, who also has a deep personal interest in social care and will attend on Zoom, can't in person because he's with his family in France and he's had only less than a day's notice. And his son needs 24-hour care and his wife has MS, so it just can't be done. But he will be there virtually because he says that this is an important issue to him.
But that very short notice invitation has riled some folk. Kemi Badenoch isn't going. She has a long-standing medical appointment, her office says, and they are sending the Shadow Health Secretary, Stuart Andrew, instead. A Conservative source did criticise the short notice invite, saying it's almost like it's only being done for show. So politics is creeping back into that attempt at cross-party consensus quite quickly. And Stuart Andrew has issued a statement saying Labour cannot rely on vague promises of reform without a clear plan for implementation and detail. I suppose Labour would say that's why they're holding an early meeting to try and find one. Andy Burnham and Louise Casey will be in the room with Stuart Andrew and a laptop with Ed Davey's head on it for half an hour. Honestly, it sounds pretty introductory, doesn't it, as far as cross-party things go. An awful lot depends now on how Louise Casey's review, which is heading into its second stage, how that is to be expedited, because the existing first tranche has also in its remit that it's about maximising existing resources. So it can't commit any extra resources or make any really big changes. The next phase is not due till 2028, Sam. So unless this picks up pace fast or the remit changes for Louise Casey, as you suggested, we're back where we are, just perhaps talking to a few more people in a room.
That's right. And there are two or three very big long-term decisions that have to be made on all of this. One is whether or not they change who is eligible for care. Remember, people with assets over about £23,000 have to self-fund their care. Then there's the question of who will provide the care. And that's actually one of the ones that's animating people this morning. There's nothing out of Downing Street on what they'll do. They say they're just going to wait for Louise Casey's review. And that's the response Downing Street also give to a fascinating Time story that companies that run private hair combs might be excluded from the new funding formula if they're set to make a profit in future. So a complete overhaul of the way that it might work.
To be clear, number 10, not saying they've signed up at all concretely to that idea, though there is a precedent in Wales, when it was under Labour control, passing a law to ban private profit from the children's social care sector, meaning that from 2030, councils there won't be able to put children into places that aren't run by operators who are set to make a profit. And it is a straw in the wind because there's a lot more scrutiny, a lot more on the pressure, including from left-leaning think tanks and the like, on the role of private contractors and private equity in care homes and in social services as a whole. So there's a big question of how far the government will go there. And a quote in the Times piece, Sam, which suggested that it could be quite far. He, Andy Burnham, is coming at this from the principle that he doesn't want to see private sector firms making large profits over the provision of a vital public service, a government source told the Times, but pushing the private sector out when it is so firmly embedded in the structures that deliver social care at the moment, that would be quite a sweeping change. And I think questions would also then be asked about, did that actually delay your implementation of other changes you wanted to make?
I find this absolutely fascinating. I mean, just to remind listeners, so we're back to having a split screen moment. Front page of the Financial Times, the retread business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, trying to reassure business groups, senior business leaders that an Andy Burnham premiership is not anti-business. But then you get straws in the wind like this one. And by the way, Anne, I didn't know that about Wales. Completely excluding the private sector from the children's social care market from 2030 is a big policy decision with ramifications all over the place. And of course, it was Labour who were in power at the point that made that decision. But if you go anywhere near this, the ramifications are enormous in England. So there was a report in 2024 that found that at aggregate level, adult social care has become almost entirely outsourced. Now, you can like that or not like that, but the bottom line is that 85% of care homes are in the for-profit sector, 12% in the third sector, 3% operated by local authorities, 85%. And that's what we would be talking about changing, removing seems inconceivable. And this is because social care is broken. And you've got this phenomena of private equity and hedge funds spying large profits in the social care sector. That's a sign of it being broken. But of course, the state doesn't fund a lot of people. From our deep dive that I did earlier this month, 37% of people in care homes are self-funded. And it seems like the more people that are government-funded, council-funded in a for-profit care home, the worse it is. There's an extraordinary stat. For-profit homes weighted inadequate or requiring improvement have a lower proportion of self-funded residents compared to homes rated good or outstanding. So I think there's a really complicated nexus between all of these things. Lots of the key stats and arguments were in that social care deep dive that we did a fortnight ago that I did with producer Joe Cook, which is on YouTube this morning. I've reposted and re-upped that 5-minute film. So it's a good primer for where we are. But there's a lot of politics and there's a lot of unpicking to be done if Andy Burnham goes down that direction. Obviously, there's already shouting with Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. Do you think it matters that Zack Polanski and Nigel Farage aren't there?
Well, it certainly matters to the NFIs. It matters a lot to them. And it does raise a question of what cross-party means these days. The government is still taking the view on this invite that it's the trad trio, the Labour, Tories and Lib Dems, who have the volume of parliamentary seats. But of course, if you're the Greens and they a Playbook this morning reporting they're very disgruntled because they had said explicitly, as they saw it, welcoming a cross-party approach to this issue, partly to get themselves on the playing field, but they have, in fairness, done some work on it. Why should they be excluded? And it would be surprising to hear that Nigel Farage is saying that he should have been a reform official, telling Playbook that if he'd been invited, he would have turned up. But of course, he would then, I think, have been very keen to focus it on ruling out what he would call the death tax of funding social care to a large extent from people's estates. Now, that is probably not where Andy Burnham wanted the talks to go, but it just goes to show that cross-party here and probably doing it in such a rush may not have landed well. Just a very quick point that you're so right about the care homes. Definitely everyone high recommend of Sam and Joe's film there. there, because it is a complex issue and it's a great primer. But it also does depend. I mean, you are right to cite those punishing stats for privately funded or owned care homes. But if you're going to go at that issue, one way you could do it is just saying we're regulating for care quality, which was, I think, the original idea. But it does look like it's pivoted in Wales to just an ideological hard no to having private sector ownership or overall ownership or key involvement. And they're two different things, because, of course, you could say we'll have the private sector as long as it performs to a level and a standard. So I'd be quite interested to hear where Andy Burnham ultimately lands on that choice.
Totally. And of course, that kind of approach, you never get the Tories, others on board with that. If we just take a step back and look at the political approach more generally, just the idea of cross-party talks and who Andy Burnham chooses to include in that, there is a sort of shift, a change from Keir Starmer here. So if you remember, Anne, Keir Starmer used to call Nigel Farage his main opponent, and policy used to visibly shift. I mean, some in the Labour Party, I think we would say lurch even from the threat to reform on a series of issues. And the same actually would happen with the Greens. You know, Keir Starmer would suddenly do a U-turn and go to the COP climate change summit last autumn because of the Green threat. So you felt the presence of those two opposition parties much more with Keir Starmer, but not with Andy Burnham. He talks about the Tories and the Liberal Democrats. He talks about Kemi Badenoch, not Nigel Farage. You don't hear about Zack Polanski and the Greens from Andy Burnham. And I think that is conscious. I think the Tories have noticed it. And we're just at a point where Nigel Farage is busy fighting himself in Clacton, has rather disappeared from the headlines because of that by-election. And the Greens seem to be at war with themselves as well over silly Zack Polanski social media posts. So that feels like a conscious attempt to change the tone towards the other parties and take back control for the mainstream parties and just dial down this idea of multi-party politics, which you saw in the polling kind of working yesterday with the squeeze on rival progressive parties, Greens down, Liberal Democrats down. That feels like it's part of the Burnham effect. But there's a long way to go, and pretty key to this, whether or not Andy Burnham can assemble a progressive vote behind him, funnily enough, is foreign policy, which is a great motivator towards the non-governing party, it's been a massive problem over 25 years for Labour. And I know that in these early days of the Burnham government, you've actually sought out a whole load of people in the new Labour foreign policy establishment and have been talking to them. What did you find out? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I did spend some of the week mooching around King Charles Street in Whitehall, talking to some foreign office contacts. And also, when you say digging, actually, I did quite a lot last night in the best possible way at a summer party the IPPR were hosting, also looking at its work in the next 10 years on the future of the left and where foreign policy might also plug into that. And I did talk for a while to Ed Miliband and to the new Europe Minister, Hamish Faulkner. So basically the new guys on the block in Foreign Affairs. Ed Miliband in overdrive, telling the gathering he was loving the new gig, Sam. He did mention with a bit of a sort of Ed Miliband eye roll that it had come as quite a surprise, possibly because he might have been talking about wanting to be Chancellor, though he didn't mention that bit. Anyway, it was a very fun and performative moment from Ed Miliband, saying that his grandfather would have been amazed to have ended up with not one but two grandsons who became British foreign secretaries. But it's not so much, at least this is my impression, it's not so much David, his brother, that he's seeking immediate advice on in the role. He has been talking to Ed Llewellyn, David Cameron's most trusted old aide, who also played such a role around the referendum there for Cameron, and later an ambassador latterly in Italy, knows the European system inside out, Ed Llewellyn. And maybe even Ed Miliband set to talk to Cameron himself about how you really run at this role. If remembering that it seems like a long way to the next election, but in foreign affairs, they grind exceeding small and slow, these meetings. How does he run at it? And I think this is a question that's been on his mind Ed Miliband, and he really wants to be seen to do that. The big picture is that he and Hamish Falconer will be more involved in the government's EU strategy. Previously, it was divided off essentially from the Foreign Office because Nick Thomas-Symonds sat in the Cabinet Office and reported directly to Keir Starmer. But now it's all joined up again. Great rejoicing there in the Foreign Office.
This is really interesting. This is the Foreign Office, Foreign and Development Office, taking back to some measure EU policy. And, you know, with Hamish Falconer having two hats rather than one of which is in the Foreign Office, and also Ed Miliband just being a bigger personality that will want to be involved in all of these things. You know, in the end, the EU policy was slightly siloed in the Cabinet Office because Nick Thomas-Symonds was just a really close pal of Keir Starmer's, and with the best will in the world, that's just not going to be the case of Hamish Falconer to Andy Burnham. But Ed Miliband will be the sort of the big figure that Burnham's known for a long time and advising him. I suppose in the end, it comes down to which of them talk to Maros Šefčovič, the sort of EU point person for all of this, but also who goes to the key EU Brussels meetings. And do you get a sense of where we're going to land on that?
Yes, a lot of diary planning already underway. Ed Miliband will go to Brussels in September to an informal meeting of foreign affairs ministers. He's been in touch already with his German counterpart. There's a US trip to follow, and we heard from that meeting of Marco Rubio and Ed Miliband out at ASEAN in Asia that they'd got on quite well. He was quite keen to say that had gone well, and they had an interesting ideas conversation. So I think that there's an attempt there to take any edge off that relationship, as we know that Ed Miliband and Donald Trump, they don't see the world the same way. But he's also off to Paris and Madrid straight away, you know, so you can see, as you suggest, that diary with Europe building up very fast. He said something very interesting in his public comments last night, which was, "I'm a politician. I'm not the government's chief diplomat." And it's a striking change of style from that much more cautious Yvette Cooper style that he's saying, I am going to pursue some political agendas here, as well as doing the shuttle diplomacy. Climate change particularly important to Ed Mill there. Hamish Falconer, new cabinet minister on the block. He got married and found himself in cabinet within days. So that's a few days to remember.
Two loves at the same time.
Oh, exactly. Let's not ask him to choose. He sounded quite fond of his new wife. He is a bit cautious, I think, about how the reconnection will roll forward because there's no date for a UK-EU summit. The talks are stuck on the EU side, and regardless of big personalities, which is true, there is a big difference there with Ed Miliband coming in. Hamish Falconer I suspect will end up doing a lot of the knitting, the fret work to underpin it. But you know, Nick Thomas-Symonds did have a personal relationship with Maros Šefčovič, and it had been built up quite carefully. That goes back to ground zero, needs to start again. And Falconer doesn't know Brussels very well in detail. It is a new area for him, though, of course, he has been Middle East minister and focused on that and Gaza, and he's also been in the Foreign Office himself. So that's how it's going to come together. How are they going to divvy up the tasks? That's what we'll know as we go towards September.
And a reminder, because when you talk initially to people about EU policy, both I talked to the outgoing EU ambassador to London and to British ministers, they like to present it as just a sort of a permanent path of improvement of relations. But my bugbear about that characterization is that it's not true in really serious areas. And of course, the EU punished us in October, slapping fees, tariffs on our steel imports, showing that they're quite happy to occasionally let the UK be caught up in negative sort of trade war, essentially, elements of their trade policy. And the UK can end up finding its own interests hurt quite a lot. And this is clearly a matter of some complication. So it's not just a simple progression. It's not just about tuition fees. I think I noticed on the Politico website, there's talk of a compromise deal. Maybe there could be some midpoint between the international rate and the domestic rate for EU students. Let's see whether that gets everybody over the line with an autumn summit. But I venture that with the Buy European and with the tariffs that can be imposed by Brussels, our relationship, depending on who's in the driving seat, is not as straightforward as everybody wants to present it.
I think that's absolutely right. I think there will be some landing zone because that tuition fees thing was a bit of a googly. It was particularly important to the German government to get that into the talks. But, as it's about a number, you can sort a number, can't you, in some way, as long as it looks like one side gave a bit and the other side gave a bit as well. That's, I think, what will happen. The Politico reporting there to Brussels is absolutely right.
I'm off to see Andy Burnham again, twice in a week, lucky guy, at the Social Care event. So we'll be back for Thursday's Politics and Salmon, and the last of this run. We turn off the alarm, the 5 a.m. alarm, after that tomorrow. So we will see you for one more push before we move to the summer series format. See you tomorrow.
Thoughts and prayers with Andy Burnham, meeting Sam Coates twice.
How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.